Welcome everyone to Tech Talk by Netranom, a podcast where you will learn tips and tricks on managing your IT. I'm your host, Alina Atkins. Let's get started. Today we have Paul Page with us again. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Alina. Glad to be here today.
Awesome. So today we wanted to kind of have basically the title of this podcast is My Company's IT, Where Do I Start? So for small business owners who are, maybe they're just starting out owning a business, or maybe they've owned a business for 25 years and they're realizing that, especially now, IT is pretty important to have in your business and they're wanting to implement it themselves.
Yeah.
So if I am a small business owner, where do I start when it comes to IT?
Well, that's a great question, Alina. And, starting from the beginning, if you're a new startup and you're wanting to start a business, obviously you may be looking for financial assistance. So one of the things you've got to consider is your budget, your ongoing budget that you're going to have for your IT needs. So that's the first thing that you want to start. Before you do your pro formas and all that stuff that you got to do, you want to make sure that you're going to dedicate, and right now the average is about 4 to 6% of your operating costs should be devoted toward your IT assets. So it could be a little higher, if you're in a more technology intensive area like, medical or financial areas, that could be closer to 10%. So your budget's very important to make sure that you include that. It's the biggest problem we run into a lot of times when we're visiting with clients is they've not set aside a budget. They haven't budgeted for IT needs. And in today's world, you absolutely have to do that. So again, 4 to 6 if you're in that normal area. If you're intensive areas of technology, you're going to be more towards 10%. So that's the first place you want to start, is getting that budget set and know that that's going to be a recurring budget expenditure in your budget. So that's the first place that we start. The next thing you would kind of look at is kind of like your IT needs. You're going to look at everything from hardware, which is going to be your computers, your printers, your network infrastructure. It's going to be switches and firewalls and routers, access points for wireless and those kind of things. And then of course your software side, what is going to be your line of business application that's going to be driving your business process? You're going to either have a customer relationship manager, a CRM, you're going to have some kind of database like QuickBooks, something that's going to keep track of money and inventory and other assets. So line of business application is that big piece of software that you got to look at. So once you've got that in place and you've kind of determined those needs, you're going to start looking at your physical infrastructure. Whether you've got a building or you're having a brick and mortar built for you, you're going to have to look and see what am I going to need to connect all of this hardware and all of this equipment and all of my business process and bring it all together. So we talk about things like cabling. Ethernet cabling is what we're looking at. In today's standard, we're at Category 6. So Category 6 is our type of cabling that we're going to want to run to all of our workstations. Depending on your size, if you've just got a couple computers, you may go away from that and not do cabling and just do Wi-Fi access, wireless access. You can do that. There are some advantages to being wired, so we would recommend wiring most of the time, unless you're in an area that you can't run wire, or maybe you're in an older building. Sometimes we see these older buildings where you can't really run cable. It may have lead paint or there may be asbestos involved. So you've got to kind of look at that as well. But if you're building a new facility, you want to plan that infrastructure well. You want to get with the architect and a low voltage electrician to run this cabling that you're going to need, the Ethernet cabling, and then of course you're going to have to plan how many runs am I going to need. Well, I've got 5 computers that are going to be in 5 different rooms. I've got 4 printers. I've got this copier fax machine. So you want to plan the right infrastructure and cabling needs for your computers and other hardware. You may have servers, depending on that software that you're going to use. It could be line of business application is in the cloud and you don't have an on-premise server. But if you've got an on-premise server, you're going to want to look at things in your facility like, where am I going to store this server? Because they get a little bit loud. They've got fans in them and everything that are making a bunch of noise. You can't really just put that next to your desk.
Right.
And then you've got like your routers and switches, these devices that connect your computer and ultimately gets it to the internet. That's some of the other things that you'll have to look at for your cabling needs. So once you've got that in place and you've talked, okay, I'm going to need 6 cable runs here, 3 cable runs to this room. I've got a network closet to put all my equipment in. A lot of times, Alina, what we see is architects and designers typically don't put that in their design. They don't have a separate room for a network closet. A lot of times,
Really?
yeah, we'll see where we walk into a customer and they'll have their network equipment right over the hot water tank.
Oh my
Which is
goodness.
a huge risk
Yeah.
because you consider that, you have a pop off and, the water spurts out and it ruins all of that equipment. So
Wow.
if you're planning a new building, you definitely want to have space talk with your architect that puts space specifically for your network equipment.
So real fast, are
yeah.
there ways like for businesses that maybe they already have, like you had mentioned, they have it's already infrastructure is in like where the water tank is.
Yes.
Are there ways to move it? How would they go about changing that? Because that sounds like something you need to do ASAP.
It is a big process to move that cabling. Depending on the number of cable runs and endpoints, your computers and printers that you have out there, it could be a little expensive to move those cables to another location. But it is highly recommended.
Yeah.
Depending on how much asset you have inside of that network closet, that could be very expensive if you have some kind of water leak or the hot water tank, the pop off goes off and then gets all of your equipment and essentially ruins it.
Yeah.
Water and electrical stuff just don't work very well
Right,
together. So
right.
you've really got to take that into consideration. So building a new building, make there's a spot for it. If you're in a building that's already got it, see if you can plan to move that somewhere else or put some other kind of shield or something in place underneath your racks that would stop that water from shooting up and hitting your
Yes.
equipment if you can't move it.
Yeah. So I know we're talking a lot about different equipment, and you had mentioned like QuickBooks and that kind of stuff as software, but to me, that kind of sounds overwhelming. Okay, I need to get all this different type of hardware. Even if you're starting off brand new, then you've got to get these laptops. Like, how do I pick a good laptop? How do I pick the best printer? How do I pick, the best hardware for my business? Are there any tech equipment that us at Netranom recommend to businesses, or even if they've been in business for 25 years, hey, maybe you should switch out these X, Y, and Z laptops for these or other type of hardware?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because a lot of times what we see is a lot of small businesses will kind of just go out and buy their own equipment. They don't do the research beforehand. They don't see what we refer to as mean time between failure, how long that laptop is actually going to last before it breaks down. So those kind of variables, what we recommend is going with one of the top providers. You have Dell and HP and IBM/Lenovo. Those are all, competitors in the marketplace. And definitely with those three, you have these 3-year warranties with the machines. 1 year on laptops, 3 years with desktops. Servers typically can come with a 3 to 5 year warranty. So we would recommend, and at Netranom, we are partnered with all of them. It just depends on, the scope of the equipment or the applications that we're going to be using as to which ones we purchase. What you have to watch out for is buying these machines or computers or laptops from places like retail markets. I won't mention any specific names,
Right.
but you can go down to the mall there or go down to the shopping center and purchase laptops and desktops. A lot of times what they'll have there is home versions. These are going to be versions that are the operating systems. Windows has a couple of different versions. They have the home versions and then they have the business or pro versions.
Okay.
You always, for a business, you want to have that pro version because
Right.
it comes with extended capabilities. It has extended security features with that. It allows you to create policies for those computers where with the home versions you can't really do that. So you want pro versions of operating systems, and then of course you want good warranty so that you get a good return on investment of that machine that you're purchasing.
Yeah. Okay, so as a small business owner, after I have figured out the cabling, whether I'm in a new building or an old building, I've figured out what laptops, printers, the hardware, and the software that I'm going to use. What do I do next? I know you had mentioned firewalls. Why should I have a firewall? How is that going to help protect my IT?
Yep. So in the old days, we had devices that were just called routers. They would actually just route you to whatever website you were going to. You would type in netranom.com and it would resolve that name to an IP address out on the internet and you would get to that location. Today, we have to have more defenses. We have to have cybersecurity stuff in place.
Yeah.
So firewall, it's that first line of defense against all the threats in the world. So it's checking everything that's coming into your local network at your business and making sure there's nothing bad in that traffic that's coming in. And it makes sure that stuff going out is only the stuff that's supposed to be going out as well. So that firewall is kind of that bank vault, if you would, instead of a screen door. Routers would be considered like a screen door, easy to kind of get past and get into the network that way. Firewalls are much more difficult. They have services on them. They have antivirus and anti-ransomware and malware and anti-spam all built into that firewall. So again, we talk about that first line of defense against all the threats on the internet, and that's that firewall. That's a very important piece with your network that you have to have nowadays.
Got you. So first, like you had said, it's a router. That's a screen door, and then the firewall is the next approach. So if they get through the router, then they should be stopped by the firewall.
Actually, no. The firewall is actually doing both roles now. The firewall is a router, but it has these extra services built in that are protecting you from all of those threats out there. So it's still routing traffic. We don't have the router anymore. We have a firewall, which is a router. And we refer to them as next generation firewalls. They have services that we refer to as unified threat management. So they're checking all this stuff. And most of the time people say, wait a minute, Paul, I've got antivirus on my PC and my servers. Why do I need it at the firewall?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you want to stop that threat before it gets into your network and has a chance to attack your machines and your servers. Right. You want to keep it out of your network and so it never gets in. So that's where, and it is a multi-factor approach. We still want that endpoint protection on your PCs and servers, but we want that extra level of defense stopping it before it even gets to your network. And that's what the firewall does for you.
Okay, great. So after I have the firewall and all that set up, now what do I do?
So at that point, we were talking about putting our endpoints in place, which would be our computers. We've got let's say we have the cabling run. We've got either our on-site server or we're using a cloud server for our applications. We set those computers up. We get them all connected together. We recommend that you use Microsoft 365. The reason we recommend that is it gives you the ability to do a lot of things with your PCs. So it allows you to encrypt those PCs. If you're working with any compliance, HIPAA or PCI or NIST or any of the other compliance requirements, that gives you the ability to encrypt those devices. It also gives you the ability to encrypt your emails that you're going to send. So Microsoft 365 is the platform that we really recommend most businesses be on. And that way you have an extra level of protection, plus you have that collaboration and communications package that includes all of the applications, the Word, Excel, the Outlook for your email, and all those other features that come with it.
Yeah, that's great. So I know you had mentioned compliance. Say, for example, if I'm, I've been running a family medical business, an office, just myself, and my job is to be a doctor, to help take care of patients. And I'm realizing that I store a lot of medical information, personal information of my patients. So how do I make sure that I'm being not only compliant, but actually taking care of my patients when they walk through the door? They know that their information is safe and protected with me. How can IT play a role in that?
So IT actually plays a big role in that. Besides all of your privacy stuff that you're working with in it, when we're speaking specifically of medical or PHI, protected health information, it's important that the IT networks and resources are compliant. So you want to make sure you're doing things like having intrusion prevention detection set up on your firewall. That's saying, hey, if somebody's trying to attack us from this other agency or this outside source, threat actors, whatever it may be, we recognize it. We see that they're trying to crack our password and get into our stuff. So we want to have certain things in place that help keep us compliant. And the IT stuff is really going to drive a lot of that. We want to make sure that any of those machines or laptops or servers that contain protected health information are protected and they're encrypted so that if somebody does get access, they can't steal that data easily. Right. So a lot of things are really considered when you're specifically with HIPAA compliance. PCI also has a lot of requirements that way as well. So a lot of the compliance requirements that are out there, HIPAA, PCI, NIST, FTC safeguard rules, all of those have a core set of requirements that you have to have when we're talking about technology. And as the technology advances, it's exponential now. It's growing and things are changing all the time. You've got to keep up to date on all the new changes, all the new threats that are out there. Those have to be considered when you're having any you've got compliance requirements for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you mentioned it's not just HIPAA compliance. There's so many other that you were just rattling off, and so it's definitely important to, just because maybe you aren't a doctor, maybe you don't own a medical facility or an office, that doesn't mean that you don't have to be compliant, that there are so many other compliance or regulatories that you have to meet as a business. And so definitely checking out, where can someone, if I'm just opening a business, how do I know if I need to be compliant for anything? I mean, there's so many, it can be overwhelming. You're like, well, do I have someone's information? I'm selling them X, Y, and Z. How do I figure out what I need to be compliant to?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And a lot of times that, in the old days, you could just, kind of plead ignorance.
Right.
I don't know, and just not. The fines today are so high, the damage to your reputation for your company and everything are so great that you can't take that chance anymore. You really have to find out. And I can tell you that, compliance is growing. As these threats have increased and people are losing money and billions of dollars are being lost to the threat actors, everybody's kind of coming under some kind of compliance. We talked about PHI, protected health information. We've got PII, which is personally identifiable information.
Yeah.
So if you're keeping anybody's names or addresses or phone numbers or credit scores or any of that information, you now do fall under some compliance. That would be the FTC safeguard rules, which is our kind of our newest one. But it's been around for a while, but it's really been enacted here in the last few years where it's really being watched now. Now they're going to have entities and agencies looking to make sure you're doing those kind of things. So really doing the research and finding out what compliance you might be under. You may have to seek outside help from a qualified IT vendor like Netranom or someone else to really kind of help you with looking to see what compliance you need. And there's a lot of third-party companies out there that are doing compliance stuff for companies as well. And those also are something you should look at if you're going to be under any kind of compliance.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, we had a webinar on, taking care of your digital privacy, and I'll link that to the show notes. But our cybersecurity manager, he brought up a great point about PII, personally identifiable information, that it's not just your social security number, it's not, it's where addresses, where you've lived. Like, there's so many different things. So yeah, maybe you are a small business owner and you don't have your customer's social security number,
right?
But do you have their name? Do you have their addresses where they've lived, where they currently live? That falls under PII. And so I thought that was very informative. And again, I'll link that to the show notes. But there's so many, like I had mentioned, there's so many different regulatories that you think, well, I don't have their social security, I'm fine. That's not the case anymore, because obviously ransomware is very prevalent in today's time, and people are out there, unfortunately, trying to steal other people's information. And so you won't be a trusted business owner. Your business won't be trusted unless you protect your customers, your patients' informations. I do like how you brought up Netranom. So this is all very overwhelming to somebody who isn't a business owner, and if I were to be one, I would not know where to start. And so it's very informative of how you've told us point blank where you need to start. But I just keep going back to the medical field, but for a doctor who just wants to help people feel better, he or she does not want to manage IT. They don't want to have to figure out the cabling or make sure that this firewall is working, or, have to download Microsoft and all this stuff. How does a IT MSP, a managed service provider, where do they come in at all of this, and how can they help a small business owner, whether it's a mom and pop shop or whether it is a medical facility? How does an IT MSP help with all of this technology?
Yeah. So back in the old days, 5-6 years ago, a lot of that was happening where, business owners were trying to do their own IT stuff. And they had to, at some point consider nowadays, you just can't do that because the amount of time that you would have to invest is going to take away from the number of patients you can see.
Yeah.
So that's where you've got to start thinking about, do I want to spend my time on figuring out these IT challenges, figuring out how I set up this firewall, finding out all that information, or do I want to include that 4, 5, 6% in my budget for someone else to take care of that for me and know it's getting done right? So that's where we talk about giving your time back to do what you need to do to run your business, to see more patients, to get more clients, to, all of that stuff. And a managed service provider is going to take that, just as if you hired your own IT person that was on site, that's what a managed service provider is going to do for you. We talked about this in the last podcast. They're going to do all that IT stuff that you need to have done for your business, whether that be the medical field or any vertical, any field you're going to be in. And that way it's getting done right. And you're including that in your budget. When you're looking at your operational costs and that 5%, that MSP can be included in that 5%, and they're going to take care of all those IT challenges that we face nowadays.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to note that you're saying that 4 to 6%, and sometimes if it's larger, it might be 10%.
Yeah.
But time is money as well, and so maybe you're thinking, well, that 4 to 6%, I can keep that and not have to, I'll just do it myself. Mm-hmm. Well, how many hours of your own personal time are you spending managing the IT? Mm-hmm. How many hours are you taking away from that patient that you want to visit? That's less patients for you to see, so therefore that is less people that you're helping and less money that you're bringing in.
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's a great point too, that you might want to try it first to save money, but in the end, you're actually taking away time and money for yourself because you're trying to handle not only managing a business, but managing your IT. And when you start a business, when you want to be a business owner, there's something that has shifted. There's something that makes you want to help people, serve them in some way. You're interested in that. You're not starting a business to take care of IT. You're starting a business for a mission or a purpose that you're wanting to fix. Yep. So I think that's a great opportunity for small business owners to not to manage their IT, to have a managed service provider to take care of that for them.
Absolutely. And I want you to think of the other part of that as well, Alina. What are the risks that are involved by you doing your own IT?
Right.
Do you have that knowledge and that experience to know what you should be doing with your IT assets to keep you protected? Because think about that. If you were to get ransomware and those people were able to get all of your patient health records and then, told you that they were going to release these records to the public, just think of how that would ruin the reputation of your company. So you've got not only that time investment that you're going to have, but the risk you're taking as well for your business. That could put you out of business. When we talk about public health or protected health information, that one patient record is a $25,000 fine. So it could get really expensive depending on how many of the patients that they were actually able to steal your records. And that's similar for the other industries as well. The PCI, we talked about the PII stuff. Mm-hmm. Those two can ruin your reputation. So when you're talking about, a business and you're wanting that business to grow and you're not taking into account the risk that you're taking, that's a really bad idea.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I learned quite a bit just on IT and where to start. As a business owner, where do I start when it comes to IT? Maybe I've had obviously laptops and that stuff for years now, but how do I protect it more? I think this is so informative for business owners and just for employees to realize that your information is being protected. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Paul, again, thank you so much. And we'll see you at our next podcast.